I'm 93 years old, and I've learned that some people don't vanish in the wilderness. They're replaced by something that looks exactly like them, talks exactly like them, but isn't them anymore. Before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. The first story I need to tell you is about a man named Marcus Webb. He wasn't my relative, but he was close enough. He was the nephew of my late husband's sister, and we stayed in touch over the years through letters and the occasional phone call. In 2003, Marcus became a Yellowstone Park ranger right after graduating from college with a degree in forestry, carrying that particular kind of idealism young people have before the world teaches them otherwise. He was very disciplined and devoted. He also truly loved his job. In every letter he sent, he described the park with deep respect. The geothermal features, the wildlife, the vastness of untouched wilderness. He worked in backcountry patrol, which meant spending weeks alone in remote areas, checking on hikers, maintaining trails, and documenting wildlife. Most rangers rotated through those assignments, but Marcus specifically requested them. He said the solitude cleared his thoughts. His aunt naturally worried about him being alone so much, but I understood Marcus. Sometimes, after the betrayals people experience in friendships and relationships, they need silence in order to find themselves again. In the summer of 2007, something changed. The first sign came in a letter dated July 18th. The handwriting was his. I had seen enough of his letters to recognize it. But the tone was different, sharper, more clinical. "Aunt Margaret," he wrote, "I made a fascinating discovery while patrolling the Mirror Plateau area. About 3 miles off any marked trail, there's a thermal pool displaying unusual characteristics. The water doesn't evaporate the way it should, based on temperature readings. I've been observing it for the past week. I'm sleeping beside it now. The sounds it makes at night are remarkable." That phrase, "I'm sleeping beside it now," naturally disturbed his aunt right away. She showed me the letter, her hands trembling slightly. "Marcus knows it's not safe to camp near thermal formations," she said. "The ground can be unstable. The gases can be toxic. Why would he do that?" I told her that maybe he didn't mean right beside it, just nearby. But I said that mostly to calm her a little, because even then, I could feel that something was not right. If you've ever had a moment where you just knew something was wrong before you could explain it, tell me in the comments. Those instincts matter more than we think. The letters continued weekly, each one describing his observations of this pool. He wrote about how the water seemed to pulse with a rhythm that matched his heartbeat, how he could hear whispers rising from the steam, though he couldn't make out words, how he'd stopped sleeping entirely because watching the pool was more restorative than rest. "I don't need sleep anymore," one letter stated matter-of-factly. I tried closing my eyes for a full night, but I kept seeing the pool even with my eyes shut. It's more efficient to just watch it directly. My body feels stronger than it ever has. I can hike 20 miles without stopping. My senses are sharper. I can hear elk moving from half a mile away. His aunt tried calling the ranger station. They assured her Marcus was fine. He checked in regularly via radio, completed his reports on time, and hadn't requested any medical attention. If anything, they said, his recent reports were the most detailed and thorough they'd ever received. That somehow made it worse. In mid-August, his aunt received a package. Inside was a journal Marcus had been keeping, not his official ranger log, but a personal notebook. A brief note accompanied it. "You should read this. I don't need it anymore. I remember everything now." The journal entries started normal enough. Descriptions of his daily patrols, sketches of animal tracks, notes about weather patterns. Then, around July 10th, the entries changed. "Found something today that's not on any map. A pool, maybe 30 feet across, water so clear I can see straight to the bottom, even though it must be at least 50 feet deep." But here's the strange part. There are shapes down there, not rocks. They're too regular, too deliberate. They look almost like people, but the proportions are wrong. Too tall, limbs at odd angles. The next entry: "Went back to the pool. Couldn't help myself. Sat there for 6 hours just watching. The shapes at the bottom moved, slowly, like they were breathing, or like the water was breathing through them." When I finally stood to leave, I realized I couldn't remember most of those 6 hours. Just blank time. But I felt good, rested, better than I felt in months. Then, I'm camped at the pool now. It's easier than hiking back and forth. The sounds it makes at night are indescribable. Not quite singing, not quite speech. Sometimes I think I understand what it's trying to tell me. The shapes at the bottom are clearer now. I can see their faces when the light hits right. They're smiling, all of them. They look so peaceful. The handwriting grew more erratic. Some entries were written in perfect, mechanical block letters. Others sprawled across pages in loose, flowing script that barely resembled his normal hand. "Day 12 at the pool. I haven't eaten in 4 days. Don't feel hungry. The steam tastes like copper and minerals. That seems sufficient. Tried to radio base, but forgot what I was going to say halfway through the call. Told them everything was fine. It is fine. Better than fine. The pool showed me something today. A reflection that wasn't mine. It looked like me, but older, wiser. It waved. I waved back." Day 18. Sleep is unnecessary. The pool provides something better. When I stare into it long enough, I can feel myself spreading out, becoming part of the water, the steam, the minerals below. It's not frightening, it's relief. like putting down a weight I've been carrying my whole life. The final entry was dated August 3rd. They want to come up. The ones at the bottom, they've been there so long, waiting for the right conditions. I think I'm supposed to help them. I think that's why I found this place. I'm going in tonight. If you're reading this and I haven't come back, don't look for me. I'm not lost. I'm exactly where I need to be. His aunt contacted the park immediately. They sent a search team to the Mirror Plateau region. It took them 3 days to find Marcus's camp. They found his tent, his equipment, his ranger gear, all neatly arranged. They found the journal's final pages, the ones he hadn't mailed, describing his intention to enter the pool. And they found the pool itself. The water was just as he'd described, impossibly clear, impossibly deep. And yes, there were shapes at the bottom. The search team's report described them as mineral formations or geological structures, but the photographs told a different story. They looked humanoid, dozens of them, standing upright at the bottom of a thermal pool, perfectly preserved by the mineral-rich water. They did not find Marcus. What they did find, 3 days later, was Marcus walking into the ranger station as if nothing had happened. He was clean, well-fed, and completely calm. He apologized for the concern, said he'd had some kind of episode, maybe heat exhaustion or dehydration, and had gotten confused about dates and locations. He'd never actually found any mysterious pool, he claimed. The journal was fiction, a creative writing project he'd been working on to pass the time during long patrols. The park offered him leave, counseling, medical evaluation. He declined. His radio check-ins had been regular, his reports were exemplary, and he showed no signs of physical or mental distress. Officially, there was nothing wrong, but his aunt knew better. She visited him once, driving 12 hours to Yellowstone. When she arrived at his staff housing, Marcus greeted her warmly. Too warmly. His smile was perfect, his movements fluid, his conversation pleasant. But there was something in his eyes that she described to me later as empty spaces where a person should be. He made all the right responses, she told me, crying. Asked about the family, laughed at appropriate times, said he loved me. But it was like watching someone perform Marcus rather than being Marcus. And his skin, it felt wrong when I hugged him. Too smooth, too cool, like touching polished stone. She tried to bring up the pool, the journal. He laughed it off gently, called it a creative episode, and changed the subject. When she pushed, his smile never wavered, but his eyes went completely flat. Not angry, just absent. The thing that finally made her leave was finding water in his bathroom sink. Not regular water, thermal water, mineral clouded and faintly steaming, sitting in a glass beside his toothbrush. When she asked about it, Marcus said, Oh, I bring it back from my patrols. The taste reminds me of home. Home, not the park, not my work. Home. His aunt left that afternoon and never went back. Marcus continued working at Yellowstone for another 2 years. His performance remained excellent. He received commendations. Other rangers said he was helpful, knowledgeable, always willing to take the most remote assignments. Some mentioned he seemed to prefer night shifts and rarely slept. But in a job with irregular hours, that wasn't particularly unusual. In 2009, he simply didn't show up for his shift. His housing was empty, cleared out completely. No note, no resignation, no forwarding address. His truck was found parked near a trail, head on the Mirror Plateau. The search team that went looking for him found his ranger uniform folded neatly beside the same thermal pool described in his journal. And this time, when they looked into the water, they counted one more shape at the bottom than they had before. Tall, upright, arms at its sides, perfectly still. The official report called it an accidental drowning. The pool was declared off-limits and its location removed from public maps. His aunt received one final letter, postmarked 3 days after Marcus disappeared. It contained a single sentence in that same mechanical handwriting. "Thank you for raising someone the pool could use." She burned it immediately, but she told me about it years later, when her health was failing and she needed to tell someone who might understand. "It wasn't Marcus who wrote that," she said. "Marcus was gone the moment he stepped into that water. What came back was something else wearing his shape, learning to be human, practicing until it got good enough that nobody noticed the difference." I believed her. I've lived long enough to know the wilderness doesn't always take people in ways we can see. Sometimes it takes the important parts and sends back the shell, the outline, the almost right version that knows how to smile and speak and move through the world, but has forgotten why any of those things matter. Marcus's aunt died in 2015. At her funeral, someone showed up that I didn't recognize at first. He was the right age, had the right face, even wore a ranger's uniform, though it looked wrong somehow. The patches in places they shouldn't be, the colors slightly off. He introduced himself as Marcus, offered condolences in a pleasant, warm voice, said his aunt had been important to him. Every word technically correct, technically appropriate. But when he shook my hand, his skin felt like polished stone, cool and smooth and fundamentally wrong. "She understood," he said, still smiling that perfect smile. "She knew some places change people, some places improve them." Then he left. I watched him walk to a truck with Wyoming plates and drive away. I never saw him again, but sometimes I wonder how many people like that are out there, walking, talking, working, living among us. perfect copies of people who found something in remote places, something that offered to take away their fear, their exhaustion, their need to sleep and struggle and suffer. And I wonder how many of them said yes. That was the first horror. And if you think losing yourself is the worst thing that can happen in Yellowstone's backcountry, wait until you hear what happened when someone tried to find something that was never meant to be found. Some people document the beauty of the wilderness to preserve it. Others do it because something in the wild wants to be seen. And once you take its picture, it knows exactly where to find you. The second story is about a woman named Claire Donnelly. I knew her because when I was living in Bozeman, Montana, she was my neighbor's daughter. Claire was a wildlife photographer, one of those devoted artists who could wait in the field for months just to capture the perfect shot. As beautiful as her work seemed, spending months alone had taken something from her, even if she didn't realize it. Yellowstone was her favorite hunting ground. She always said the word hunting sounded violent, that she was really just bearing witness. She was the type who liked using metaphors like that. In the spring of 2011, Claire received an assignment from a major nature magazine to photograph Yellowstone's lesser-known features. Not Old Faithful or the Grand Prismatic Spring. Those had already been photographed too many times. They wanted the hidden places, the areas tourists never reached, the secret face of the park. Claire already had a different kind of personality, and she was thrilled to get this assignment. For 3 weeks, she planned her route, studied maps, and spoke with rangers about remote areas that was still interesting from a photography perspective. An older ranger, who had worked in the park for 30 years, marked a few locations on her map. But he crossed out one area in the northeast corner with an X. According to what she wrote in her planning journal, he told her, "Don't go there. There's nothing worth photographing anyway. Just dead trees and old thermal vents." Of course, that made Claire more curious. But you should listen to the experienced people in life. I can understand her. When you're young, your blood flows fast. She hiked into that area in late May, when the snow had just melted enough to make the trails passable. The ranger was right about one thing. It was desolate. Acres of bleached, dead lodgepole pines standing like skeletal fingers against gray sky. The few thermal features were small, unremarkable pools and vents that barely steamed. But there was something else. In the center of a clearing, surrounded by those dead trees, stood what looked like a natural rock formation. Except the rocks were arranged too deliberately. They formed a rough circle, maybe 20 feet across, with a gap on one side like an entrance. Inside the circle, the ground was darker, as if stained by something old. Claire photographed it from multiple angles. The light was perfect, hitting the stones just right to create dramatic shadows. She spent 2 hours there, shooting, adjusting her position, experimenting with different lenses. It was only when she reviewed her images that evening in her tent that she noticed something odd. In every photo, no matter the angle or lighting, there appeared to be a figure standing just outside the stone circle. Not clearly visible, more like a suggestion of a person-shaped shadow. In some shots, it was on the left side. In others, the right. But always there, always just at the edge of the frame, as if it had been following her around the circle while she worked. She convinced herself it was a lens artifact, a trick of light and shadow. She'd been alone. She was certain of that. The next morning, she hiked to a different location, miles away. A meadow filled with wildflowers, elk grazing in golden morning light. Classic Yellowstone beauty. She shot for 3 hours, capturing dozens of images she knew would be portfolio pieces. That night, reviewing her work, she found the figure again. Same shadow shape, same ambiguous presence, standing at the edges of her flower meadow shots, sometimes behind a tree, sometimes half visible through tall grass, always watching the camera, always watching her. Claire's hands started shaking as she clicked through image after image. The figure appeared in every single photograph she'd taken that day, even the ones she'd shot quickly, without composing, just testing her light meter. There it was, patient and persistent, lurking at the margins. If every photo you took showed something that wasn't there in real life, would you keep shooting or pack up and leave? I want to hear your answer. Let me know in the comments. She checked her camera for defects. She cleaned her lenses. She reviewed her technique. Everything was fine. The problem wasn't technical. Claire called her mother, my neighbor, that night via satellite phone. "I think my camera's broken," she said, but her voice suggested she didn't really believe that. Her mother offered to drive out to bring backup equipment, but Claire refused. She was a professional. She'd finished the assignment. The third day, she hiked to a geothermal area, carefully staying on the boardwalks. Steam rose from colorful pools. The landscape was alien, beautiful, dangerous. She photographed the bacterial mats, the mineral deposits, the warning signs telling visitors to stay on the path. In those photos, the figure was closer, not at the edges anymore, standing 15 feet away, 20 feet, still unclear, still shadow-like, but definitely closer than before. And in one image, a shot of a steaming pool, the figure appeared to be standing in the water itself, unaffected by heat that would boil a human alive in seconds. That's when Claire broke her own rule. She decided to photograph it directly. The next morning, she returned to the stone circle where she'd first seen it. She set up her tripod, mounted her best camera, and waited. Hours passed. She shot the landscape, the sky, the dead trees, and in every image, There it was, maintaining its distance, always present but never quite in focus. Finally, as the sun began to set, she did something that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. She called out to it. "I see you," she said to the empty clearing. "I know you're there. If you want your picture taken, come closer. Let me see you properly." The air went still. The distant sounds of birds and insects stopped. Claire said later, it felt like the entire forest was holding its breath. She looked through her viewfinder and started shooting. Click! The figure was at the edge of the stone circle. Click! It was halfway across. Click! It was standing directly in front of her lens, 3 feet away. Claire looked up from her camera. Nothing was there. The clearing was empty. She looked back through the viewfinder. The figure filled the entire frame. She could see it clearly now, in the image preview. Tall, impossibly thin, with proportions that weren't quite human. Its face was a blur of features that kept shifting, sometimes appearing almost normal, sometimes stretching into something elongated and wrong. But its eyes were clear, fixed on the camera, fixed on her. Claire ran. She left her tripod, grabbed her bag, and ran back toward the trail. She didn't stop until she reached her tent, 2 miles away, lungs burning, heart hammering. That night, she couldn't help herself. She had to look. She pulled the memory card from the camera and loaded the images onto her laptop. The last series of shots, the ones from the stone circle, showed the figure in progressive detail. Getting closer, getting clearer. And in the very last image, the one she'd taken right before running, the figure wasn't alone anymore. Behind it, stretching back into the dead forest, were hundreds of others, all watching, all waiting. A crowd of those impossible shapes, standing among the skeletal trees, their blurred faces all turned toward her camera. Claire deleted every image from that day. Then she formatted her memory card. Then she threw the card into her campfire and watched it melt. She hiked out the next morning, 3 weeks earlier than planned. She told the magazine she'd gotten sick. They understood. They'd used the earlier photos from her first 2 days, the ones she hadn't deleted. Except when the magazine published the spread 6 months later, Claire bought a copy and found something that made her blood turn to ice. In the background of one image, a beautiful shot of the flower meadow she'd taken on day 2, there was a figure, not the shadow shape anymore, fully visible, standing among the flowers, sharp and clear and undeniably real. And it was holding something, a camera, pointed at the viewer, pointed at anyone who looked at the photograph. Claire quit photography after that, sold all her equipment, moved to Seattle, and took a job in graphic design, working with digital images other people had created. She never set foot in Yellowstone again. But here's what still haunts her mother, and what haunts me. Last year, Claire was scrolling through Instagram when she saw a post from a nature photographer who'd just returned from Yellowstone. Beautiful images, professional quality, stunning light, and in the background of every single shot, barely visible unless you knew to look for it, was a figure. The same one Claire had photographed, following this new photographer around the park, appearing at the edges of their frames. Claire sent a private message. "You need to stop photographing Yellowstone. Delete those images. Trust me." The photographer never responded. 2 weeks later, their account went dark. No new posts, no activity. And when Claire's mother did some digging, she found that the photographer had been reported missing during a solo trip to the park's backcountry. Search teams found their camera equipment by a stone circle in the northeast corner, surrounded by dead trees. The memory cards were blank, every image erased, but the camera itself still worked. Rangers checked it and found one photo remaining in the internal buffer memory. A self-portrait of the missing photographer, smiling, arm extended to hold the camera. And standing behind them, perfectly clear and sharp and impossible to dismiss as a shadow, was something tall and thin, with a face that kept shifting, holding what looked like an old camera of its own. The official search concluded after 3 weeks. No trace of the photographer was ever found. But sometimes, when Claire can't sleep, she searches social media for Yellowstone photography. And she sees it over and over. Different photographers, different angles, different seasons. But always that same figure, patient and persistent, appearing in the backgrounds of images taken in the park's remote places, collecting, documenting, watching, just like the photographers themselves. Claire's mother asked me once, near the end, if I believed her daughter's story. I told her yes, absolutely, because I've learned that wilderness has its own ways of seeing us. And sometimes it wants a record too. Sometimes it wants to capture us the way we try to capture it. And once it has your image, once you've invited it to be seen, it never quite lets you go. That was the second nightmare from Yellowstone's shadows. But the final story might be the worst, because this time, what the park took wasn't permanent. It gave something back, and what came back brought the wilderness with it. There are fates worse than dying in the wilderness. Sometimes, the worst thing that can happen is surviving and bringing a piece of that wilderness back with you, lodged so deep in your bones that it starts growing. This final story is about Thomas Garrett, and I knew him because he married my great-niece in 2008. He was a Yellowstone Ranger for 15 years, one of those steady, reliable men who loved the work and never sought glory. He led educational programs, managed campsites, and responded to emergencies with calm efficiency. Everyone liked Thomas. He was exactly the kind of person you'd want finding you if you got lost in the backcountry. In October 2013, Thomas was part of a search and rescue operation in the Thoroughfare region, the most remote area in the lower 48 states. A solo hiker had activated an emergency beacon, and Thomas volunteered to be part of the extraction team. It was late in the season, early snow already falling, temperatures dropping below freezing at night. They found the hiker after 2 days of searching. He was hypothermic, dehydrated, and incoherent, babbling about the trees that walked and the ground that breathed. Classic symptoms of severe exposure. They stabilized him, called for a helicopter evacuation, and began the long hike back. That's when Thomas fell. The team was crossing a narrow creek, swollen with snowmelt, when Thomas slipped on a submerged rock. He went under, the current dragging him downstream. By the time his teammates pulled him out, he'd been in the water for nearly 3 minutes, swept 100 yards downstream, battered against rocks. He was unconscious, no pulse. They started CPR immediately. It took 6 minutes to get him back. 6 minutes of chest compressions and rescue breathing while snow fell around them and the creek roared past. Finally, Thomas gasped, water pouring from his mouth, and his eyes opened. But something in those eyes made his team leader pause. Later, in his incident report, he wrote, "Ranger Garrett's affect seemed altered following resuscitation. He was responsive and could follow commands, but his facial expressions appeared delayed, as if he was remembering how to make them, rather than making them naturally." They airlifted Thomas out along with the hypothermic hiker. At the hospital, doctors found no brain damage, no lasting injuries from the drowning. His oxygen levels normalized. His vitals were stable. After 48 hours of observation, they released him with instructions to rest and follow up with his primary care physician. My great-niece, Sarah, picked him up from the hospital. She told me later that the drive home was strange. Thomas was quiet, which wasn't unusual. He'd always been the contemplative type, but he kept turning his head to look out the window with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "What are you looking at?" she finally asked. "The trees," he said. "They're so still here. They don't move at all." Sarah laughed nervously. "Trees don't move, Thomas. That's kind of their thing." He looked at her with those eyes that his team leader had noticed. Something slightly wrong in the timing of his expressions. "No," he said softly. "They do. You just have to watch them long enough." The first few weeks, Sarah convinced herself he was just recovering from trauma. He went back to work on light duty, desk work, no field assignments. He seemed functional. He smiled at appropriate times, held conversations, helped around the house. But small things were off. He stopped eating meat, said it felt wrong now. He'd only eat vegetables and preferred them raw. He spent hours standing at their bedroom window, just staring at the trees in their backyard. Sometimes she'd wake at 3 a.m. to find his side of the bed empty, and she'd discover him outside in their yard, barefoot in the snow, standing perfectly still among the pines. "What are you doing?" she'd ask, shivering in her robe. "Listening," he'd reply. "They talk at night. You can hear them if you're quiet enough." She scheduled an appointment with a neurologist, worried about delayed effects from oxygen deprivation. The scans came back normal. Brain activity was typical. No physical explanation for the behavioral changes. Then the dreams started. Not Thomas's dreams, Sarah's. She'd dream about the thoroughfare, about dense forest and freezing water. She'd dream about drowning, about being pulled under, about opening her eyes beneath the surface and seeing something looking back at her. Something that lived in that water, ancient and patient, waiting for someone to stay under long enough. When she'd wake, gasping, Thomas would be sitting up in bed, watching her with those carefully timed expressions. "You saw it too," he'd say, not a question, a statement. "Saw what?" "What was in the water? What came back with me?" In December, Thomas returned to full duty over Sarah's objections. He requested backcountry assignments, winter patrols in the most remote areas. His supervisors were pleased. Most rangers avoided those routes in deep snow. He'd be gone for a week at a time. When he came home, he seemed more solid, more present. But Sarah noticed other things. His skin had taken on a grayish tint. His hands were always cold, even in a heated room. And when he showered, the water that ran off him smelled like creek water, that particular mineral and stone smell of mountain streams. One night, Sarah woke to find Thomas standing at the foot of their bed, motionless, just watching her sleep. When she gasped, startled, he smiled that delayed smile. "I'm sorry," he said. "I forgot that watching people sleep is considered unusual. It doesn't seem unusual to me anymore." "Thomas, you're scaring me." He tilted his head, processing that information. "I don't mean to. I'm still learning to be this." He gestured vaguely at himself. "The part of me that drowned didn't all come back. Something else filled the empty spaces. I'm mostly Thomas still, but not entirely." Sarah moved to her mother's house the next day. Thomas didn't protest. He helped her pack with mechanical efficiency, carried her boxes to the car, kissed her goodbye with lips that felt like cold stone. "I understand," he said. "The wilderness isn't meant to live in houses. I should have stayed where I belonged." That was the last time Sarah saw him as her husband. 2 months later, in February 2014, Thomas led a group of winter campers on a guided snowshoe trek through the Lamar Valley. It was a routine educational program. Thomas did them all the time. But this group reported something unusual. Throughout the hike, Thomas barely spoke. He'd stop at random points on the trail, stand perfectly still for minutes at a time, then move on without explanation. When the group paused for lunch, one participant tried to take Thomas's photograph. The camera malfunctioned. When they checked the memory card later, the image showed only static where Thomas should have been standing. That evening, Thomas didn't return to the ranger station. A search began immediately. They found his snowshoes and pack at the edge of a frozen creek in the thoroughfare, the same creek where he'd drowned months earlier. The ice had been broken from below, as if something had punched through from underneath. They searched for 3 weeks, never found a body. The official conclusion was that Thomas had fallen through thin ice and been swept away by the current beneath. A tragic accident. A ranger lost to the wilderness he loved. Sarah attended the memorial service. She accepted condolences. She cried when people shared stories about Thomas's dedication and kindness. But she told me later, in confidence, that she felt more relief than grief. Whatever came back from that water wasn't really Thomas anymore, she said. It was wearing him, learning him, trying to be him. And every day, there was less of my husband and more of whatever it was. The story should end there, but it doesn't. Last year, a ranger was conducting a wildlife survey in the thoroughfare when he encountered another ranger he didn't recognize. The man was wearing an old-style uniform, the kind from a decade ago. He was standing in a frozen creek, ice water flowing around his legs, seemingly unaffected by the temperature. "You shouldn't be out here alone," the ranger said. The man in the creek smiled, a delayed, carefully constructed expression. "I'm not alone," he replied. "I brought the wilderness with me. It lives in me now. I'm exactly where I belong." The surveying ranger took a photograph before hiking quickly away. When he reviewed the image later, the space where the man had been standing showed only water and stones. No figure, no ranger, just the creek, flowing patient and cold through ancient forest. But in the water's reflection, you could see something. A face pressed against the underside of reality, looking up, watching, waiting. The photograph is locked in a case file at Yellowstone's administrative offices. They don't show it to new rangers. They don't talk about it publicly. But Sarah saw it once when she demanded answers about what really happened to her husband. She told me the face in the water was Thomas. And it wasn't. Both things true at the same time. Some people drown, she said, and they just die. But Thomas drowned in a place where something old lives, something that's been in those waters since before the park existed, before people gave the place a name. And when they brought him back, when they forced air back into his lungs and started his heart again, they didn't bring back just Thomas. They brought back what had started to claim him. The wilderness doesn't like to let go of what it takes. And if you force it to give something back, it makes sure a piece of itself comes with it. Sarah moved away from Wyoming after that. She remarried eventually to a man who works in an office and has never been camping in his life. She's happier now, she says, but she never looks at photographs of mountains or forests. And she's never gone back to Yellowstone. She doesn't want to risk seeing something familiar standing in a creek, wearing the face of someone she used to love, waiting patiently in cold water for someone else to drown long enough to carry the wilderness home. If these stories stayed with you, if they made you look twice at the woods, the water, or the places that feel just a little too quiet, make sure you like the video and subscribe for more true feeling horror from the places people don't fully understand. And if you have a real scary experience you'd like me to tell in a future video, you can send your story to the email in the description. I read them all, and some of them still keep me up at night.